Welcome, you're watching Vox News, your daily news updates with Rita Kamkumo. Our headlines today: the presidents of Ivory Coast, Ghana, Senegal and Niger are due to arrive in Bamako this week as Mali's political crisis deepens. A civil society organization warns against an upcoming electoral crisis in Ivory Coast 3 months before the October presidential election. The police clashed with protesters in Guinea as demonstrations against President Alpha Conde's desire to run for a third term resumed on Monday. Our top story today: the presidents of Ivory Coast, Ghana, Senegal and Niger are due to arrive in Bamako on Thursday as Mali's political crisis deepens. The West African leaders will try to find a way out of the political impasse the country is experiencing, with the June 5th protest movement still demanding President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita's resignation over perceived failures in tackling the economic crisis, corruption and the country's 8-year-old jihadist conflict. The news comes after a 5-day mediation mission from the Economic Community of West African States, headed by former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan, ended on Sunday after failing to reconcile the president with the opposition coalition. In Ivory Coast, a civil society organization said on Thursday that the conditions for peaceful elections in the country were not met and warned against an electoral crisis 3 months before the October presidential elections. The Ivorian Citizens Alternative, an organization close to the opposition, lamented that the Independent Electoral Commission and the Constitutional Council are close to the government, while they are the bodies responsible for organizing and proclaiming the results of the elections. The civil society organization also deemed the revision of the electoral list completed on the 5th of July a failure, citing the significant lack of voters' registration, even though the Electoral Commission has not yet released any official figures. The organization pleaded for reprogramming of the revision of the electoral list, as well as a presidential pardon for military prisoners and political leaders who were sentenced in absentia, and the return of political exiles. Security forces clashed with protesters in Guinea's capital Conakry on Monday as demonstrations against President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita's suspected attempts at remaining in power resumed after a 3-month coronavirus hiatus. Monday's protests were called by the National Front for the Defense of the Constitution, an umbrella opposition group made of political parties, unions and civil society groups.
I think that we achieved the goal to show that in Guinea there are people who suffer injustice and that the people of Guinea do not support this third mandate of President Alpha Conde. The city is completely paralyzed because of the rain and especially because of the massive deployment of forces. People have not been able to march on the agreed routes, but all the neighborhoods have gone out. The young people have burned the tires, set up the barricades. The whole city is paralyzed today.
Brûler les pneus, dresser des barricades et que toute la ville est paralysée aujourd'hui.
Conde became the country's first democratically elected president in 2010. However, he enacted a new constitution in April following a disputed referendum held in March, which will reset presidential term limits, allowing him to run for an additional third term, a move that fueled protests organized by the National Front for the Defense of the Constitution.
Given the objectives of the National Front for the Defense of the Constitution, they should have realized since 22nd March that this approach had no chance of succeeding and should have relied on what has always brought us together, namely dialogue. Even if it was sometimes difficult to implement the agreements, in the end they allowed us to spend a decade in the exercise of democracy and building our democracy.
Protesters are adamant that the motive behind changing the constitution is to allow President Conde to run again in the upcoming October presidential election. Zimbabwe issued a strong warning on Monday against its citizens who intend to take part in protests scheduled for July 31st against an alleged public sector corruption. Zimbabwean authorities have warned it will deal with participants as with terrorists, threatening them with prison, arguing that the planned protests will violate coronavirus regulations and that they aim at toppling President Emerson Mnangagwa, according to local website Daily News. The government's warning came after the organizers of the planned protest, composed of members of the opposition as well as civil society groups, said they will go ahead with demonstrations whether authorities permit them or not, and until the government takes action towards widespread public sector corruption and initiates national dialogue. Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi is determined to tackle corruption in his country. President Tshisekedi recently appointed 2 anti-corruption officials in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where a final tribute was paid on Monday to magistrate Raphael Yani, who suddenly died as he was presiding over the hearings of an unprecedented anti-corruption trial. The president appointed Ghislain Kikangala as coordinator of the Agency for Prevention and Fight Against Corruption on Sunday and prosecutor Yeye Kisula Betika as head of the National Financial Intelligence Unit to fight money laundering. On the 8th of April, Kisula Betika decided to arrest former chief of staff of the President of the Republic, Vital Kamerhe, who was sentenced to 20 years in prison at the end of June. Sudan's former long-serving president Omar al-Bashir, who was already convicted for corruption, has gone on trial this Tuesday in Khartoum over the Islamist-backed military coup that brought him to power in 1989. The former leader, who was ousted amid a popular uprising last year, could face the death penalty if declared guilty of the overthrow of the democratically elected government of then Prime Minister Sadek al-Mahdi. One of the lawyers who led the push to bring the case to court believes the trial will be a warning to those who try to go against the constitutional system.
The articles open against the accused fall under the constitutional system from Chapter 96 of the Penal Code of 1983. The crime was committed on 30th June 1989, and the law that was in effect at that time was the 1983 law. This trial will be a warning to anyone, whether from a political or military force, who tries to destroy the constitutional system. This is a criminal act according to the law. This will safeguard Sudanese democracy through these trials.
Some of the defense lawyers argue that al-Bashir's trial is nothing but a political stunt aimed at presenting the Islamic movement as terrorists.
This is a political trial which is being disguised within the law as a legal trial. This is a political trial being held in a hostile environment on the part of the judicial system against the defendants. In fact, this trial is aimed at the Islamic movement, and its sole purpose is to present it as a terrorist movement.
ووصمها بأنها حركة إرهابية.
76-year-old al-Bashir's trial comes as Sudan's post-revolution transitional government has initiated a series of reforms in an attempt to rejoin the international community fully. On the international scene, Turkey announced on Monday that it would open an embassy in Togo. After meeting with Togolese President Faure Gnassingbé in the capital Lomé, Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said Turkey will further develop its bilateral relations with the West African country and that a new embassy will soon be opened. Cavusoglu added that the sides talked about improving relations but also organizing flights to Togo by Turkish airlines, as well as cooperation on security and education. South Africa's first Afro-descendant rugby test captain, Siya Kolisi, who led his country to win last year's World Cup, took a stand against racial injustice by posting a heartfelt video message on social media on Sunday.
For me, it was more than just about sport. I think it's everyday life for me. I mean, for me, I felt that my life didn't matter since I was a little kid, you know, growing up in the townships, you know. My mentality was all about surviving from the moment I was born. We don't feel like our lives matter. And until our lives matter, no lives matter. We're all important. Black lives actually matter. We wanted to matter from when we're in the township. I wish that I felt like it mattered. It really didn't feel like it mattered. It mattered at all. So I encourage people to have the difficult conversation there in a work environment. People must feel valued. Every culture must be represented, because South Africa, we're a unique country where apartheid was in South Africa. So things have to change, have to be done differently. Whether we like it or not, transformation has to be part of this while we are winning. And that conversation actually changed the game for us as a team.
The 29-year-old rugby player went on to say that he had failed to denounce racial injustice sooner and called for change.
I failed as a leader. I've been in a position of leadership for a very long time in my sport, and I didn't address it because I was scared that I was going to get kicked out, or I was going to be seen differently, or I'm not doing what it's supposed to be done. Time to be scared and to be silent there's no time for that anymore. We got to start addressing these issues, because if I don't address it, then the next kid that's coming through, he's going to suffer the same way as I did. It's time for us, all of us, to change and actually start living that the South Africa that so many people have fought for, so many people have died for. We should be the generation that's changing this. It's 2020 right now. So many people have suffered to make this country a better place. It's time for us, all of us, to come together, because it's the only way we can fight this. It's the only way we can beat this.
Kolisi's post had more than 150,000 views this Monday, with hundreds of people praising him about adding his voice to the conversation. Finally, on the football scene, France confirmed on Monday the cancellation of the prestigious Ballon d'Or awarded to the best performing football players each year. France Football magazine said there will be no edition in 2020 due to the coronavirus pandemic. The announcement comes as top European leagues are coming to an end following a resumption of matches after weeks of suspension. That's it for today. Thank you for watching Vox News.